Disclaimer: J.K. Rowling may not have a Nobel Prize for Literature, but she still owns Harry Potter. "So, can you explain this, Professor?" Dan Granger demanded of Minerva McGonagall. After some confused back and forth of owls and flu messages from the hopefully innocuous location of the leaky cauldron, Remus had fetched McGonagall, and the two of them had escorted Hermione back home. McGonagall had an odd sense of déjà vu sitting here with the Grangers, except that the last time she was in this position, they were in a hotel in Italy, and the Grangers were even more hostile to her than when she'd first revealed the existence of magic to them. "I'm afraid I only have part of the story, Mr. Granger," she said. "I was only informed of the new decree yesterday. However, I believe I can speculate. Has your daughter told you about the, political unrest going on in our world this summer? If you mean about Voldemort being back and your government refusing to believe it, yes, unfortunately," Emma said bitterly. McGonagall flinched at Voldemort's name, but she collected herself and answered, "Yes, precisely, Miss Granger. The Minister's campaign to unseat Headmaster Dumbledore from his position of influence in our society has hit a snag. That is, he cannot be removed from the school without cause. Likewise, Fudge's efforts to have Harry Potter expelled also failed. In short, he cannot suppress our message any further, so instead he seeks to take control of the message by having all children in the country educated under Ministry standards. I do not believe he is singling out Hermione, if you are concerned about that." "Among other things," Emma replied. "But if Headmaster Dumbledore is still in charge of the school, how does this help Fudge?" "We don't know yet," Remus said. McGonagall sighed. "I fear the Ministry will try to interfere at Hogwarts this year. It is the only explanation for such a decree. But beyond that I cannot say anything." "So what are our options?" Dan asked. "No offense, but we still don't want Hermione going back there if we can help it. Not after her first 3 years. Could we send her to one of our schools for a year or two?" "A Muggle school, Dad?" Hermione said, but her father cut her off. "We want to know all of our options, Hermione. If putting things off for a couple years until you're of age is what we need to do—" "It wouldn't work," Remus cut in. "Excuse me?" "Magical education is compulsory up to age 17, McGonagall explained. "It's enforced by the DMLE the same as your truant officers enforce Muggle education. If you are still in the country, they will come for you. All of you." Hermione shivered at the implication. Were her parents subject to magical law? She'd have to look into the jurisdictional issues. "Lovely," Emma grumbled. "And we can't move on this short of notice. Is there any chance we could get Hermione's residence legally changed to France, Professor? She already goes to school there." "I don't think so," McGonagall said. It was an intriguing idea, but she couldn't see it working. "No, you couldn't," Remus said. "Not with her being underage, and you two still living in Britain. Maybe under Muggle law you could, but the Ministry doesn't think very highly of Muggle law." Hermione spoke up then. "What about the tutoring option?" she asked. "Even if it's Ministry standards, at least I wouldn't be stuck in the castle. No offense, ma'am." "In principle, yes, you could take private tutoring, Miss Granger," McGonagall replied. "But in practice it is very unlikely you would be able to do so." "Why not?" "For 2 reasons. One is expense. No student is ever turned away from Hogwarts for lack of money, whereas private tutoring is very expensive. Most students who choose not to go to Hogwarts are homeschooled by their parents, an option the Ministry just closed. I can see you are well off here, but the second reason is more important and follows from it. Quite frankly, the only people who take private tutoring are rich purebloods. You can try and ask. One of the licensed tutors might make an exception for a student as bright as you, but probably they won't accept a Muggle-born." "That's not fair!" Emma yelled. "Is that even legal?" Remus raised his hands apologetically. "The magical world isn't like the Muggle world, where you have laws against all kinds of discrimination. I wish it were. Things have actually gotten worse in the past couple of years, especially for werewolves. I'm sorry, but there's not really anything you can do." Dan and Emma both slumped back in their seats, looking defeated. "So we have no legal recourse, then?" Dan asked. McGonagall shook her head sorry. "I'm very sorry," she said. "Except in the unlikely event that you can find an approved tutoring program for her, you have no legal alternative to sending Hermione back to Hogwarts." Hermione could see the pain on her parents' faces. She couldn't rightly imagine how it felt, to be systematically blocked from every option to keep your child from harm. "Maybe it won't be so bad," she said, trying to comfort them somehow. Her mum sighed and looked at her, tears welling in her eyes. "We really hoped you were done with that place, Hermione," she murmured. "Harry was still nearly killed again last year, wasn't he?" "Yes, but, well, things have changed in the past year. I've changed, Mum. I know it's not the answer you want, but I'm not helpless anymore. I can hold my own in a duel against Harry, and, well, it was mostly luck that he survived against Voldemort, but—" She remembered her map. "And I have much better ways to spot suspicious characters than before. There are ways to detect invisibility, and—" "Hermione," Emma cut her off, laying a hand on her shoulder. "We know how gifted you are with magic. We've seen—" She stopped when she saw McGonagall raise her eyebrow and Remus grin. "Your grades. You told us all about how you helped Harry train, too. But you're still our daughter, and we still want to keep you safe." "I know, Mum." As his wife and daughter hugged, Dan gave McGonagall a stern look that rivaled her own and said, "Well, Professor McGonagall, if we have no legal recourse, we'll have to send Hermione back to Hogwarts. But we'll be looking into our options to move to France before Christmas holidays. And we'll be sending a complaint to the Ministry about this." "You can, but I doubt anything will happen," Remus said. "If the person behind this is who I think is behind it, she won't even read a letter from a pair of muggles." "Great. Well, at least we know Madame Maxine likes us. She should take our side if anyone tries anything, especially after the Ministry called her school substandard." Hermione started laughing incongruously. "Oh, they're really asking for it, aren't they?" Remus chuckled as well and said, "Well then, since this is settled, as much as it can be anyway, what are your plans, Hermione? You do have that awards ceremony next week. You can come back with us now or stay here a while longer. Dumbledore doesn't want you coming and going too much, though." "Yeah, because Dumbledore is so great at security," she thought. "I think," she said, "I think I'll stay here until my awards ceremony and then go back to headquarters. I really don't get enough time to spend with my parents, and I want to go to Diagon Alley this week, too." "You should have an escort for that," Remus said at once. "I can take you on Monday if you like." "Monday's fine, thank you, Remus." "So I probably should have asked at the beginning, but where did you actually want to go?" Remus asked when they reached Diagon Alley on Monday. "Well, I need new Hogwarts robes, and then I want to stop by Ollivanders," she said innocently, although Remus raised his eyebrows. Since it was school shopping season, old Mr. Ollivander was manning the counter, and he certainly looked pleased to see Hermione. "Ah, Miss Hermione Granger," he said with a smile. "A pleasure to see you again. 10 3/4 inches, fine wood, and dragon heartstring. Yes, excellent wand, that." "It's good to see you too, Mr. Ollivander," Hermione said. "I saw your work on Gamp's Law, Miss Granger, along with Miss Gamp and Professor Vector," he said. "Extraordinary work. I knew you had potential, but this is beyond even my expectations. It takes a rare talent to do that. And how have your experiments in wandcraft gone this summer, may I ask?" Hermione was blushing at Ollivander's praise by now. The one I was working on burned out when I tried to hold a Patronus charm on it too long. I'm guessing that was due to the emotional power of the charm." "Oh, most definitely. The Patronus charm is in a different league entirely from most spells. A pity. I would have liked to see your work." Ollivander seemed to notice Remus for the first time. "And Remus Lupin, 10 1/4 inches cypress, and a unicorn hair. A very fine wand, if I do say so myself. It's still serving you well, I hope?" "Very well, Mr. Ollivander," Remus said. "Excellent. Well, then, how can I help you today, Miss Granger?" "Well, sir, I'd like to buy a second real wand," she said. "One to wield with my left hand alongside my old one, or in case something happens to it." Mr. Ollivander's eyes widened, and he seemed to draw back a little. If that's allowed, Mr. Ollivander," Hermione added apologetically. "Well, well, well, well," he said. "It is allowed, Miss Granger, but I should warn you about the nature of second wands. It's not as simple as just carrying two wands on you, certainly not just duplicating your old wand. Your wand is a reflection of you. The one you bought 4 years ago has grown with you, changed in subtle ways, so that it still works as well for you as the day you bought it, even though you yourself have changed. A new wand would be a reflection of who you are now, and it is usually a good deal more difficult to fit a second wand than your first." "Okay," she started. "There is more, Miss Granger," Ollivander interrupted. "There are reasons why most wizards only carry one wand. First, a second wand is more expensive than your first," he explained. "There's a tax on extra wands. Also, many people, if they know you are carrying more than one wand, will regard it as suspicious, will think you are up to something. And most importantly, there is a small but significant chance that your old wand will resent you choosing a new one, and it will no longer work as well for you in the future." "Oh," Hermione said, thinking over his words. But she needed a backup wand, she reasoned. She had a bad feeling her life would give her ample opportunities to use both of her wands, so she couldn't see her old wand getting jealous. And it was a reflection of herself, and she wasn't a very jealous person, she thought. "Just the same, Mr. Ollivander," she decided, "I'd still like to get a second wand." "Are you sure, Hermione?" her mom whispered. "Definitely. The benefits definitely outweigh the risks on this." "Very well," Ollivander said, and he paused to think for a moment. I think this would be a good teaching exercise, if you don't mind. Garrett, come out here," he called. A moment later a young man came out from the workroom, old Ollivander's grandson, whom she had met last Christmas holiday. "What is it, Grandpa?" he asked. "Garrett, Miss Granger here would like to buy a second wand. A left-handed wand." Old Ollivander nodded significantly to indicate she was sure about it. "Perhaps you could help fit her." "All right, then. Could I see your current wand, Miss Granger?" She handed it over, and he examined it. Vinewood, 10 3/4 inches. Dragon heartstring core, very good. And you want one for your left hand?" "Yes." She held out her left arm. Garrett snapped his fingers, and the tape measure on the counter started measuring. "Interesting," he said. "Not many witches or wizards ever try left-handed casting. You can cast left-handed, Miss Granger?" "I've been practicing for over a year." "I see. Well, this won't be easy to fit." "Just reason it out, Garrett," his grandfather encouraged. "Well, the wand core is attuned to your magical talents, and those rarely change, so you'll want another dragon heartstring wand. Probably a little longer than your old one to symbolize your personal growth since you bought it. But the wood and flexibility is tricky, very tricky. Let's try beechwood first, since you've worked with that before in your own studies." He disappeared into the stacks of wands, and returned with one that looked superficially similar to the blood-bound wand she had made for herself at the beginning of summer. Unlike when she bought her first wand, she knew some magic now and could easily cast spells with it, but she could also feel at once that it was not as responsive as her vinewood wand. Old Mr. Ollivander could tell from the moment it touched her fingers, and almost moved to take it from her, but he restrained himself. Garrett picked up on it pretty quickly, too. On her first visit, Hermione was fitted with her wand on the third try, almost immediately after she started asking questions about how they worked. Mr. Ollivander had laughed when he worked it out, as if her inquisitive personality had made it obvious. This time, however, she had no such luck. She was shown wands of dogwood, walnut, pine, hornbeam (old Mr. Ollivander seemed disappointed about that one), ebony, acacia, ash, multiple beech wands, and larch. After half a dozen tries, old Mr. Ollivander jumped in and showed her some himself. After more than a dozen tries, he and his grandson started arguing about what to try next. "Maybe another vine wand would be best," the old man said after a few suggestions. "You're the one who told me replacement wands are almost always different wood, Grandpa," Garrett responded. "What about red oak?" "For her non-dominant hand? Don't be ridiculous." "But she's a spellcrafter." "You can't wield red oak with a non-dominant hand, Garrett. Now, maybe you? The old man shivered.
You? No, definitely not the type.
It could happen. You isn't all about the dark arts. She's shown herself as a protector of her friends.
I'm sorry, Grandpa, I'm just not seeing it.
You still have much to learn, then. Old Ollivander disappeared into the stacks, and returned with a wand of yew. Hermione tried it, but it was still no more responsive than the others.
I still think we should give Red Oak a shot,
Garrett said. Then go and find one and try it, Garrett, his grandfather snapped. Garrett did just that. He took his time looking through the stacks, and came back with an excited look on his face.
I have a good feeling about this one, Miss Granger, he said. Red Oak and Dragon Heartstring, 11 3/4 inches, nice and springy.
Hermione had a premonition as well as she eyed the reddish-brown wood, and from the instant it touched her skin, she knew it was the right one. Here was a reflection of her first wand, changed through her 4 years' experience as a witch. Her first wand was light and carved with a vine pattern. This wand was a handsome medium tone and carved, improbably, with a double helix design. Her first wand felt warm and inviting in her hand. This one felt cool, but a pleasant cool, less raw power and more precise and calculating. She could still feel its power, though. In her first wand it was like a beam of sunlight had produced pure white sparks. This one, however, felt like a taut bowstring, ready to be released at a moment's notice with perfect accuracy. When she waved it, it lit up the shop in a subtle continuum of blues and silvers. Old Mr. Ollivander's jaw dropped. "I stand corrected," he said.
"I told you, Grandpa."
Hermione passed the wand to her right hand, where she could feel less power and potential, but its devastating precision leapt in her fingers, like a perfectly balanced sword. Not that she'd ever used a sword before. Then she passed it back to her left and drew her first wand with her right. The hot and cold side by side seemed to make the perfect combination.
"It's wonderful," she said. "Just what I needed."
"Well, it seems the instincts of the young can sometimes surpass the experience of the old," the elder Ollivander said. "Very good work, Garrett. Curious. A very curious match, Miss Granger. I haven't been this intrigued since I fitted your friend, Mr. Potter." Hermione flinched.
"This wand isn't a brother to some dark ladies I don't know about, is it?"
"No, I meant the choice of wood. Red oak has a dual nature, you see. It makes a spellcrafter's wand, probably the best wood of all for spellcrafting, but it is also a duelist's wand. It will accept only a hand with fast reactions and a light touch. You must have put in an extraordinary effort for it to submit to your non-dominant hand."
"Daily practice for over a year, sir," she explained. "Most wizards don't ever practice anything they don't use regularly for more than a few weeks." "You see, Grandpa," Garrett said. "Perfectly logical." "Very well, then. That will be 10 gallons, 9 sickles, Miss Granger." Hermione thought that markup sounded less like a tax and more like highway robbery, but she paid it, and when she did, she felt more protected than she had in a long time. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Professor McGonagall was back on Saturday to escort the Grangers to Hogsmeade. Muggles rarely entered the all-magical village, even if they had family there, so in these troubled times it was not a good idea to go there alone. Plus, McGonagall wouldn't miss this for the world. "I can't tell you how proud I am of both of you," she told Hermione and Rebecca when they met the older girl at the offices of Transfiguration today. "I've had many students win this award, but never such a talented pair as you two. And since it'll be made public soon, I'll tell you I've nominated the two of you and Professor Vector for the Gamp Prize this December." Rebecca looked extremely excited by that, and Hermione wasn't surprised. The Gamp Prize wasn't a scholarly journal award, which wasn't hard to win in the tiny magical world, but a global prize, like the Nobel, for the greatest advance in transfiguration in a given year. Though, unlike the Nobel, it was still awarded for work actually published during that calendar year. Rebecca gasped, squeaked out, "Thank you so much, Professor," and actually hugged McGonagall before she came to her senses. "You're quite welcome, Miss Gamp," she said before taking her seat. Wow, Hermione whispered, trying not to giggle too much. You just hugged Professor McGonagall and lived. Rebecca blushed, but she stayed courteous. Well, it's just that no one in my family's won a Gump since Great-Great-Aunt Hesper in 1919. Really? No one? Hey, it's a global prize. It's not easy. And most of my family's well-known work was centuries ago. It would be a great honor for another Gump to win it. Then I hope I don't sound too self-serving when I say I hope we do. I'm mostly hoping for the Wenlock Prize myself. Well, you would, Rebecca said with a smirk. The Wenlock Prize was another global prize, this one for arithmancy. The girls expected to see nominations for that soon as well. The award ceremony was conducted with a little pomp, by Muggle standards. Even though Transfiguration Today was subscribed in America, Australia, and even parts of continental Europe and India, it was a small community and a small audience. Hermione and Rebecca were handed certificates, posed for photographs for the Daily Prophet, and were asked to speak about their research for a couple of minutes, and that was about it. Well, it was good to see you again, Rebecca, Hermione said when it was over. I'll see you at Hogwarts. What? She sputtered. I thought you were going back to Beauxbatons. Unfortunately not. The Ministry passed some educational decree that I have to go to school in Britain. Believe me, I'm not any happier about it than you are. I'm not unhappy about it. Oh. Hermione and Rebecca hadn't got on very well before, but apparently collaborating on this project had genuinely brought them together. Well, thanks, Rebecca. After dropping her parents off at home and saying goodbye, Professor McGonagall took Hermione back to Grimmauld Place, where she faced the mostly pleasant task of meeting up with her friends with whom she would once again be going to Hogwarts. The unpleasant part was the bit where she left for over a week without telling them. They weren't happy, but they understood. It was hard having Muggle parents in a magical world that seemed to be out to get you. Actually, there was one other unpleasant part about it. After dinner, George pulled her aside. She noted at once that Fred wasn't with him, and said, Hermione, could I talk to you for a bit? Sure, George, she agreed, already having some idea of what this was about. He led her to the currently unoccupied drawing room and leaned against the back of a sofa. So, Hermione, he said, you're going back to Hogwarts with us? Yes, I am. For now, at least. I'm guessing this is about what we discussed on the train ride last spring? George flashed his boyish grin. You see, that's what I like about you, Hermione. You're always on top of things. But she sighed in return. George, please don't make this any harder. He frowned. You did say something about things changing if we could go to the same school. I would never push you to go against your parents and leave Beauxbatons, but now that you have to go back to Hogwarts anyway... George, please stop. She held up her hand. Look, we both still like each other, okay? I'm mature enough to admit it. And we're both people for whom maybe that's not the easiest thing. Not many girls can see the brilliance behind the class clown, and surprisingly few boys are interested in a witch who can best them at blowing things up. Well, I wouldn't go that far. Do you remember what I taught Harry to do to that dragon last year? Hermione said sweetly. Fair enough, he admitted. The point is there aren't many. I know, I've looked. And if I knew I was coming back to Hogwarts for good, I don't think I'd have any reservations. But this is probably only going to be for the autumn term. Come January, I'll probably be back at Beauxbatons, and I'll have 2 more years there. And you'll be working in your shop, and you don't know how that's going to go. I don't want to take that away from you. So you're saying you don't want to take the leap because you don't know what the future holds? Yes, no, she said as she saw his trap. George, I'm not like you, okay? I can take risks, sure, but I can't risk everything on one Quidditch bet. But George started chuckling. Okay, that was too far, he admitted. Just please sit down. Let me take a minute and tell you what I'm seeing from my perspective. Hermione stood stiffly, but she nodded and took a chair. George swung his legs over the arm of the sofa and sat across from her. I don't want to pressure you unfairly, he started off. Ron probably would just because he's clueless. Fred might. Heck, even Ginny might if you were a boy. But you've shown me I don't have to be Fred's doppelganger. I want to be better than that. Thank you for that, she said softly. The point is, he went on, we both like each other. But here we are, stuck 1,200 miles apart all year. And every time we're apart I think, maybe it'll go away. And then every time I see you, you do something that brings it all back. Like that bit with the daydream charms. That was just so... Hermione. It was so effortlessly brilliant you acted like it was obvious. I never get tired of it. I don't know if you feel the same way, but... Hermione blushed as she remembered that ginger pirate from the daydream charm. Maybe, she admitted softly. Maybe more than I'd care to admit. George didn't say anything to that, so she just stumbled on. So you're saying maybe it's time we stopped lying to ourselves and admitted these feelings aren't going away? I think that's what you're saying now, he quipped. George! Sorry, just kidding. But basically, yes. I mean, if you really feel the same way I do, then this has been going on for 8 months with us being apart and trying to avoid the subject. Now, we know we're going to be around each other every day till Christmas. Can you honestly say you don't want to look into it further? Hermione just stared at the older boy. Even after all this time, he could still surprise her. When did you get so mature? She managed. Oi, I resent that, George said, but he was still smiling. And you didn't answer the question. I don't know, Hermione said. She bit her lip nervously. This would be so much easier if we were just a normal couple. No, not normal, I mean... Well, it doesn't matter, because I still probably won't be here come January. Hermione, at the rate things are going, I don't know if we can even predict that far, George said seriously. And if you do go away after Christmas, well, we can still work it out like we've been doing already. I know you're not as, carefree as I am, but what's life without a little risk? Hermione continued biting her lip as she considered his words. Was she being too afraid of the unknown? She thought back to some of the private conversations she'd had with her mum this past summer. Mum had seemed to be pushing her to live a little. Hermione, you can't go through life without getting your heart broken once in a while. Her therapist, the one she seemed to visit a couple times each July, with increasingly contrived non-magical stories to help her deal with whatever horrible thing had happened that June, had said much the same thing in more clinical terms. And then there was George flashing his winning smile. Oh, who am I kidding? Yes, already. Yes? Yes what? George said impishly. Yes, just kiss me, will you? She snapped, unable to articulate her feelings any further. George didn't need to be told twice. Their kiss was a good deal longer than their previous ones, and it started Hermione's heart racing, and a part of her was glad when they broke apart, because she needed to calm down after all that. Then George said, You're still gonna pay for that mature comment, though. Hermione Granger sat bolt upright in bed. Of course, it's so simple, she said. In a crowded house like number 12 Grimmauld Place, few things could stay secret for long, so Hermione and George had decided not to try to hide their relationship. The day after that awkward conversation, they had started holding hands as if it were perfectly normal. It took 7 minutes before anyone noticed. The fact that they were now dating was met with squeals of glee from Ginny, incredulous sputtering from Ron and, oddly, Mrs. Weasley, a knowing smile from Mr. Weasley, and threats, mostly from Hermione, to Fred to lay off the wisecracks, or else. But after the initial shock had worn off, it had been a pleasant week. In practice, not much had changed, except for the hand-holding and the occasional kiss, but Hermione knew she had a new kind of emotional support in George that she hadn't had before, and she thought she appreciated that most of all. But this had nothing to do with any of that. Hermione woke early and raced downstairs to catch Mrs. Weasley making breakfast, because she was pretty sure she had just had the most brilliant idea she'd had all month. And as she was going back to Hogwarts tomorrow, she wanted to investigate it as quickly as possible. And Mrs. Weasley was just the person to ask. "Good morning, Mrs. Weasley," she said as she entered the kitchen. "Why, good morning, Hermione dear," Miss Weasley said brightly as she fried up some bacon. "You're up early this morning." Yes, ma'am. I had an idea and was wondering if I could talk to you. Mrs. Weasley stopped and looked at her. To me? She said in surprise. Yes, ma'am. All right, then. Actually, I've been wanting to talk to you, too. You have? Yes, I just wanted to apologize if I made you and George feel uncomfortable about your relationship.
What?
You haven't been making me feel uncomfortable, Mrs. Weasley. I'm glad to hear that, dear. I was just concerned that I wasn't being fair to you. I did ask you multiple times if you were playing a prank, after all. Oh, that! Hermione chuckled. I've really just come to expect that around George and Fred.
Mrs. Weasley smiled sadly.
It still sounds so strange to hear someone say that. George and Fred. You don't notice that you've been saying it one way for 17 years, until someone points it out to you. I do think you're good for George. I hope Fred can find someone who can handle him just as well. I was just surprised. I was surprised you went to that Yule Ball together last year, and I'm still a little surprised. You're just so different. I know, Hermione said with a smile. It took me by surprise, too, but I think we have quite a lot in common where it counts. Well, I'm sure your own mother's doing a very good job, but if you ever want to talk, you're welcome to come to me. Thank you, Mrs. Weasley, she said. But I had something different I wanted to talk to you about. Oh, what was that? Could you teach me how to cast the imperturbable charm?
What?
Mrs. Weasley thought. You want to learn how to cast the imperturbable charm, she said, certain she'd misheard. Yes, ma'am. In retrospect, Hermione should have thought of it weeks ago, when she first saw it cast on the kitchen door. It only came to her now because Mrs. Weasley had used it again for a meeting last night. And may I ask why? Mrs. Weasley said suspiciously, which Hermione had more or less expected. After all, if she could cast it, she might be able to reverse it. Actually, Hermione could probably reverse engineer it on her own with the spell manipulation techniques she'd learnt last year, but it would be more reliable to learn it properly. The imperturbable charm stops anything from touching the door. Everything just bounces off. I thought if I cast the imperturbable charm on a crucible, it could withstand the heat of really hot molten metals. I was experimenting last year with forging metals in small amounts, but some of them melt at temperatures so high that a normal crucible can't hold them.
Mrs. Weasley blinked in confusion at Hermione's nonlinear explanation. That happened to her sometimes when her mind got ahead of her words, and she couldn't get everything out in order.
You want to cast the imperturbable charm on a crucible, she said. Like a potions crucible? So it can hold molten metal, yes. Do you think that will work?
She had clearly never thought of such a use for that charm.
I think it will, unless it can't stand up to very high heat. Do you know any reason why it wouldn't? Well, no, I suppose not. It's just very strange to use that spell. And dare I ask why you're working with molten metal? She demanded, getting to the more pressing issue. Just an arithmetic curiosity for now. Mostly I'm trying to figure out how to work with tungsten, because essentially no non-magical methods will work on it. I might find a better use for it later.
Mrs. Weasley stared at her for a minute, trying to process all this.
Hermione, she said at last, I wish I could understand a fraction of this arithmancy stuff the way you do. I never would have thought to do that in 100 years. I suppose you can't use it against us at this point, so I'll show you.
She walked Hermione through the wand motion and incantation, which Hermione picked up quickly, and even let her try it a few times.
Just don't tell Ron and Ginny, she whispered with a grin. You know, I would have let Ginny try a few household charms if she asked, but she never seemed interested.
Hermione wasn't surprised by that. If Ginny Weasley ever became a house witch, she'd check her for Polyjuice Potion. Around mid-morning, the Hogwarts letters finally arrived, and not a minute too soon. Professor McGonagall had explained that they were having a hard time finding a defense professor, hence the delay. The new first years had still been sent their letters in July, since they would need their full supply list, and they were told that the missing book would be provided when they reached school. But the board didn't want to spare the expense to supply the rest of the school with an as yet unknown defense text. Hermione opened her letter and saw that there was only 2 new course books set this year. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 5, by Miranda Goshawk, and Defensive Magical Theory by Wilbert Slinkard. Everything seemed in order until everyone converged on Harry's and Ron's room, and things took a turn for the surreal. "Get Ron red and gold pajamas to match his badge," George told his mother, smirking. He winked at Hermione when she walked into the room. "His what?" Mrs. Weasley said idly. "His badge," Fred repeated. "His lovely, shiny new prefect's badge." "Wait, Ron? A prefect?" Hermione stammered. That was impossible. Obviously, the best choice was Harry. Ron could probably manage it, but, well, he was Ron. But Mrs. Weasley screamed when she saw Ron was holding a prefect's badge. "I don't believe it!" she cried. "Oh, Ron, that's wonderful! That's everyone in the family!" "Excuse me?" Hermione defended her boyfriend. Wow, that still sounded weird to think. George wasn't any happier. "What are Fred and I, next-door neighbors?" he said. "I think she means everyone in the family who had a chance at it," Fred said more quietly, as their mother continued to gush over Ron. George smiled at that. "Everyone who actually cared." "Everyone who actually wanted to be a perfect little teacher's pet. No offense, Hermione." Hermione rolled her eyes. "It's all right, George," she said, loud enough to be heard over Mrs. Weasley. "I didn't make prefect either." Everyone stopped. All eyes turned to her. "Hermione?" Harry said in shock. "You aren't a prefect either?" "No." She shrugged and held her envelope upside down. "At least, I didn't get a badge. I assume Parvati got it." "You're not having us on?" George said cautiously. He'd come to recognize her sometimes deadpan sense of humor. "No, I really didn't." "Has Dumbledore gone mad?" Ginny broke the silence next. "Harry not being a prefect is one thing, but you're the best by a mile." Hermione shook her head calmly. "I don't know about Harry, but for me, I'm sure it's because I won't be there in the spring. I wasn't expecting to get it in the first place." Everyone stared at her, as if they were worried she'd explode at any moment. "What?" "We thought you'd flip not being one," said Fred. "You're you." "Well, it's aggravating that I won't get the chance because of that stupid ministry decree, but it's not like I need it for my resume like some people I won't name. In my field, it's your scholarly papers that are important, and I've got that covered pretty well already." "Huh. Well, this is a day I never thought I'd see," George said. Mrs. Weasley wanted to reward Ron, as she had her older sons when they became prefects, and after some discussion, Ron decided he'd prefer a new broom. "I think we can manage that," she said once they'd settled on that. "I'll get all your books for you while I'm out, if you like. It'll save a trip." Thanks, Mrs. Weasley," Harry muttered. He fished in his pockets for some money to pay her. "Right and left-handed editions for me, please," Hermione said, and she handed her 4 gallons that she thought would cover the cost, plus some cushion. Mrs. Weasley gave her a queer look, but she said, "Of course, Hermione," and went on her way. Hermione wasn't sure what to do about Harry. He looked really let down by being passed over, especially as Dumbledore seemed to be all but ignoring him lately. Unfortunately, she couldn't do much about it because Ron was hanging around all day, and that would be an awkward conversation to have in his presence. Not that her red-headed friend wasn't sympathetic. He seemed as baffled as anyone else as to why he'd been made a prefect, and he seemed genuinely concerned with Harry's plight. But it still didn't help matters that Mrs. Weasley decided to throw a party for him. After a long day, Hermione decided she'd have to leave it for the train ride tomorrow.